Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and with a lot of help I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore the 111-year-old classic sailing yacht Tally Ho. Now right now we're in the middle of trying to melt down and re-pour the lead ballast keel. So last week we set up all our equipment, and the next job is to make the mold into which we can actually pour the molten lead. But to make the mold we first have to make a positive image, a plug or a template of the keel, the shape we want it, and then we can use that plug to actually make the mold around it. Then we'll take the plug out and then we'll be left with a negative mold into which we can pour the lead. But first of all, we have to make that plug. So this is a body plan for the ballast keel. So this shows the shape of the ballast keel at every station. We're actually going to be using these to make the keel plug, as it were. So I'm going to be gluing these to some tempered masonite or hardboard, and then I'm going to cut around them on the relevant line for that particular station, and then what I'm going to end up with is a rigid sort of station template or mold for every station of the keel, and then we can build our plug around those. So one of the first things we need is a nice flat even base to make our keel plug and the mold, and we need that to be something that we can glue to with a hot glue gun. So I've just laid down these 4 sheets of particle board on the floor and silicone them down so they're not going to move around, and that's going to be our base. Right now they've just got a lot of lead and other heavy things on them to hold them down while the silicone was drying. Now I've already cut out and made all the keel station molds, so those are the templates for each section of the keel, but I don't want to assume that they should be perfectly in line. They should be pretty close, but maybe not exactly, and so what I'm going to do is actually take a template of the shape of the bottom of the keel timber and then lay that down on here, and then I can arrange the station molds to fit within that template, and I'll make sure if there's any very slight wiggles in the bottom of the keel timber that will then be reflected in the shape of the lead ballast keel. So now we have the shape of the bottom of the keel timber transferred onto our nice flat particle board floor. And the next stage in making the plug is to stand up and glue down the templates that I made earlier that define the shape of the keel plug, glue them down on their stations. Now the plug itself, as well as the mold, is going to be largely made of sand. And so we're mixing a dry silica sand with a urethane resin called Pepset, which is from the casting industry. And so when you mix those things together, you have a little bit of time before it sets, and so you can pour your sand into whatever shape you want, and then it'll set into a kind of almost like a sandstony type consistency. And you can sand it back, you can fair it, it's quite easy to work, but it's a very stable material for pouring hot metal into. Now we don't want to use more sand and resin than we have to, so we're going to actually box out in between the templates in our keel plug to take up a lot of that space with just air and particle board. And then once we've made our boxes in between them all, then we'll put up some kind of dams on the outside so we can pour the sand in and fill up that space. Hey Patty. God, what are you doing?
I'm just reliving my glory days here with my old friend.
So, having filled in between all the stations with sand and the resin, and now it's all gone off and hard, and so we're sanding it down back to the stations because it's obviously lumpy in certain areas. It was all a little bit proud, so we're sanding sand, which is kind of bizarre, but it actually just falls away really easily, so you can even rub it with just a piece of wood and it comes off, and we are using a really rough sandpaper on some of our longboards. So we're just getting down to roughly the shape of the stations right now, and then we're going to do a little bit more fine tuning in the morning and actually sand it back to slightly below the stations, and then we're going to use veneer plaster to build it back up, and that's a harder, thinner, smoother coat, and that's what we'll be doing our very final shaping on. Good job, guys.
called veneer plaster. It's a very popular wall finishing material. The sand pattern that's underneath here is close, but not nearly as close as I'd like it to be in terms of size and fairness. And so this material is quite sandable. So when we're done here and it dries, and it has to dry completely, we'll be able to sand it to its final form. So it's a fairing compound, really. And all I've really got to guide me is the station. I depend on them being right, and everything else in between gets kind of faked.
So we're waiting for the veneer plaster to dry before we can sand it, but in the meantime the guys have been doing a lot of preparations for making the box which we're going to build around the plug, and so that is actually going to form our mold. We're going to build a steel box all the way around the plug. It's going to be made out of steel channel. It's going to be about 20 inches deep, so it's going to be higher than the plug. And then in that space between the plug and the steel box, we're going to eventually fill that with the same sand and pep set mixture. But before that, we're going to put a lot of reinforcement inside. So that's going to consist of nuts welded to the inside of the box, and then we'll thread J-bolts into those nuts, so they'll be sticking into the box towards the keel plug. And then we'll lay a lot of rebar fore and aft either side of the keel and hoops over the top of the plug, and that'll all be tied together with fencing wire. And so eventually, after we've poured that sand in there and it's set, it'll be a really strong, rigid mass. And so hopefully we can actually lift the entire box and the mold off of the plug, which should stay behind hopefully, and then we can flip it upside down, or rather right way up, drop it back down again, and then we'll have a sand mold with an open top with the negative image of our keel the correct way up now, into which we can pour the molten lead.
We got a big old stack of this like C-channel steel, and I'm just cutting it into length so that we can build up a 3-layer wall around the keel plug, so that we can then pack sand in between that wall, and then eventually flip it over and pop the plug out and fill it with lead. So Petey's got this circular saw that's got a metal cutting blade on it that cuts metal, coincidentally enough.
Sweet.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That's pretty great.
Yeah. It's a good day.
So we just finished building our Keel mold sand box, our flask. It's a steel channel, 3 pieces of steel channel stacked up on each other, an 8-inch wide and a 2/6. It's got all its reinforcing metal in there, our rebar and our J-bolts. We are gonna pack that with sand around our Keel plug. That's foundry sand, or silica sand with foundry resin in it, something Doug brought with him. We're gonna pack that mold flush to the top. We actually skeet the top off and make the very top of our mold as flat as we can. That whole box is then gonna get rolled over so we can pour our lead into it. And that sand's got to sit hard on our shop floor. It kind of backs all the weight of that lead when it gets poured in there. In addition to all of our rebar and J-bolt reinforcements to help stiffen up our sand, we're going to put some, we're going to weld on some cross member pieces both on the top and bottom of our flask. Those cross members are going to keep our box stiff and you know, prevent the walls from collapsing outward, or at least keeping the shape of our mold, you know, so we don't get a bulge in it that we have to fare down after the keel's in place.
Yeah, or catastrophic failure.
Or catastrophic failure. Tune in to the next Tally Ho episode for lead keel number 2, catastrophic failure.
So the box that contains the mold is pretty much complete now. Rowan's just finishing up the very last bit of welding, and so we're getting ready to fill it with the sand to actually make the mold itself. And this is a really critical part of the process because we only really have one shot at it. And once we put the resin into the sand, then we have to really fill it all up in one go, because if part of it fully kicks and hardens, we can't actually stick more sand to it. So we've got one shot to do the whole thing. If anything happens that stops us partway through, we're kind of pretty screwed, I think, because the next mix of sand won't stick to the stuff we've already put in if it hardens. So it's kind of like keeping a wet edge on a paint job, but a lot more critical because we can't go over it once we've started.
The most critical, we up there, we f the whole thing up. So we have to be very careful that we catalyze, that we don't double resin, that we don't, you know. I'm going to try to work in a way that I'm not distracted, because when I get distracted, I can, you know, forget if I've put the catalyst in or that kind of thing. So from my perspective, we want 2 people that basically handle sand. As soon as one load is out and on its way down here, that next load goes in. We have, in round numbers, 30 mixes to do here. I'm hoping we can do it in 30. Good work.
That's beautiful, you guys. Good.
Oh, yeah. Good mixing there, huh?
Nice job. You can roller skate on that.
Yeah, it's kicking. Woo. Well, we finished packing the sand. It was pretty exciting, pretty fun, trying to get it all in quick enough. We all got into a really good rhythm, and I think we did a good job, hopefully. It's hard to tell how many voids there are in there, if any. But Rowan's just finishing off welding some brackets onto this box now, because now we have to lift it up and flip it over. And so we're hoping that as we lift it up, the plug, the original Keel template that we made, is gonna stay behind on the floor. It's a pretty high stakes operation because if we do something wrong and we break the mold during this process, it's a huge amount of work to get back to this stage, probably at least a week's work for all of us. And none of us have done this before, or really know how it's going to go and how to do it. So fingers crossed, and we're just going to try and take it slow and steady.
Got it.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, we're starting to go in. Yeah,
Everybody's in?
yeah.
My putty knife is in.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
Let's take them all to one. Well, everybody's at about a half, right?
Yeah.
So take them all to one.
And I'm there.
I'm
You're
there.
at one.
I'm at one. You're
Took
at
me
one.
one
We're at
turn.
one.
Oh,
1.5.
1.5.
1.5.
Let's go to 2.
Ready?
To 2?
Yeah.
At 2.
I'm at 2, baby.
Coming up nicely.
2.5. 2.5.
2.5. 2.5. 3. How about 3?
Going to,
Anybody give me 3?
then we get 3.
Okay, you're gonna go up.
We got 3.
Yeah.
3.
3.
We got 3.
3.
What
comes
after 3 though?
3.5.
Well,
The end of the wedge after that.
yeah, then there's the next wedge for
3.5.
Oh, I hit the mold, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh,
good.
me too. That's
plug.
good.
Oh,
That's
Give
good.
it up.
Ever since I was really little, I've always wanted to learn how to weld. Ending up in this place, even though I came here for woodworking, has been really nice because there's a little bit of metalworking as well. In the past, I've done a lot of welding with clean material, and I've spent time fitting the pieces together and TIG welding them, which is a totally different experience to taking these really thick, chunky pieces of rusty steel and trying to fill gaps and break through oxidation. And I think it'll hold up, but that's from my perspective. And we'll see what the lead has to say about it.
You nervous about that?
I'm a little nervous, yeah. I think Doug's nervousness has worn off on me, but Doug's still moving forward with it, so seems okay to me? I don't know.
1, 2, I want.
So this morning we pulled our box, our mold out of the shed, and now we're at another really critical stage of this operation. We got to flip it upside down so that it's ready to pour, and it's pretty heavy. We think it's about 7,000 or 8,000 pounds. It's about 4 tons. And obviously it's kind of delicate, it's full of sand. We really don't want to break that sand off for it to fall out. So we've got to do this really carefully. So we don't really know how it's going to go, but fingers crossed, and think this is the safest way we can think of doing this without risking it falling and jolting.
So I've just painted on mold wash over the surface of the resin-bound sand. And the reason for the mold wash is so that the lead doesn't penetrate the sand. Lead-filled sand is really difficult to deal with. You can't plane it, you can't chisel it. So this gives a parting line and prevents the lead from infiltrating the sand. And it's an alcohol base, and it's still damp, and I'm going to flash it off by using a flame. I don't think it'll get an out of control flame.
Is that what you expected?
Well, it's more flame than I'm used to.
Oh my goodness gracious, what happened?
We lit it on fire.
Well, the mold is finished. It's ready to be filled with lead. and I can't tell you what a relief it was to actually get that mold picked up off of the plug and flipped the right way up. Weeks of work went into it, and it would have been really disastrous if it had just fallen apart, which was a big fear. So the mold's ready, all our equipment's ready, the pot is ready, the burner's ready, lead is ready, so now we've pretty much just got to pour it. So that'll be happening very soon, but for now, thanks a lot for watching, and a massive thank you to everyone who has donated or otherwise supported this project. It does make a huge difference. It means that we're able to keep doing this work, and I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, so I really, really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.